The Pallidus system died in fire, but the report took 3 months to reach Terra. The galaxy is a big place, and news travels slowly through the warp. By the time the High Lords of Terra read the data slate, the event was already history. It started on a frozen world called Valhalla Octus. This planet was a ball of ice and rock at the edge of known space. It had no cities. It only had deep mines. The people there were workers who belonged to the Departamento Munitorum. They dug for frozen gases to fuel the engines of the Imperial Navy. Life was short. The cold killed the weak. The work killed the strong. Nobody expected anything important to happen there. The discovery began with a scanner error. A mining team was deep under the southern polar cap. Their drills hit something that was not rock. It was harder than diamond. The machine spirit of the drill screamed and died. The foreman was angry. He went down to inspect the damage. He found a sphere of ice that glowed with a strange blue light. It was not the cold blue of the glacier. It was a living light. It pulsed like a heartbeat. The miners were superstitious. They wanted to run. They thought it was a demon trap. But the tech priest in charge was curious. He ordered them to clear the ice. He saw numbers on his scanner that made no logic. The object was emitting 0 radiation, yet it held enough energy to power a hive city. News of the object went up to the orbital station. The station commander was a tired man named Hector. He did not like mysteries. Mysteries in the 41st millennium usually lead to death. He sent a team of armed soldiers to the site. He also sent an astropath. An astropath is a blind telepath used for communication. As soon as the astropath got near the ice sphere, he started to scream. He did not scream with his voice. He screamed with his mind. Every human within 10 miles fell to their knees with a headache. The astropath clawed at his face. He babbled about a wind that cuts the soul. He spoke of an ancient bridge that was broken. Then his brain shut down, and he went into a coma. Commander Hector panicked. He followed standard Imperial doctrine. He assumed the object was a weapon of chaos or a Xenos trap. He targeted the mine with the ship's lance batteries. He prepared to vaporize the entire site. It is better to kill 1,000 loyal workers than to let a demon loose. He gave the order to fire. The massive laser beam shot down from space. They burned through the atmosphere. They struck the ice shelf directly above the sphere. The explosion should have destroyed everything. But the smoke cleared. The ice was gone, but the mine was not destroyed. A bubble of air held the destruction back. Inside the bubble, the sphere had cracked open. A boy stood there. He was small and bald. He had blue tattoos on his head and hands. He looked like a monk from an ancient history book, but his eyes were glowing white. The laser fire from the ship had not touched him. He had stopped it. He had moved the energy aside with a wave of his hand. The soldiers on the ground aimed their rifles. They were terrified. The boy looked at them. He did not look angry. He looked confused. He collapsed on the snow. The blue light faded. The storm stopped. Commander Hector paused his second shot. He saw a prize instead of a threat. He sent a shuttle to collect the body. He did not know he had just picked up a weapon that could break the galaxy in half. The Inquisition was already listening. They diverted a black ship to the sector. The boy was now property of the Emperor. The transport ship Goliath's Burden was not a place of comfort. It was a flying fortress of grey steel and old rust. The air inside smelled of recycled sweat and burning oil. Commander Hector had placed the frozen boy in the deepest cargo vault. He did not trust the boy. He did not trust the strange blue light that had stopped his laser cannons. Hector was a man of the Imperial Guard. He understood rifles and tanks. He did not understand magic. In the Imperium of Man, Magic is a crime. It is called witchcraft. It is dangerous. Hector doubled the guard outside the vault. He ordered his men to weld the door shut. He left only a small slot for food. He hoped the black ship would arrive soon. The black ships belong to the Inquisition. They collect witches. They take them to Terra. Hector just wanted to be rid of the problem. Inside the vault, the boy woke up. His name was Aang. He did not know he was in the 41st millennium. He remembered the storm. He remembered the ocean. He remembered freezing himself to save his bison upper. He opened his grey eyes. He expected to see the sky. He saw a dark metal ceiling. Wires hung down like dead vines. A red light blinked in the corner. It made a buzzing sound. Aang sat up. His head hurt. His body felt heavy. He looked for his staff. It was gone. He looked for Appa. The bison was gone. He was alone in a metal box. The floor was cold. He stood up and rubbed his arms. The blue arrow tattoos on his skin felt itchy. Aang tried to open the door. He pulled on the handle. It did not move. He took a deep breath. He moved his hands in a circle. He pushed the air with his palms. This was airbending. It was his way of life. A blast of wind hit the door. The metal groaned. It bent outward slightly, but it did not break. The steel of the future was stronger than the iron of the past. Aang was confused. He shouted. He asked if anyone was there. He spoke in his own language. Outside the door, the guards heard strange noises. They heard the metal groan. They gripped their laser guns tighter. They were tired. They had been on shift for 12 hours. Their rations were stale bread and water paste. They did not want to deal with a monster. They pressed a button on the wall. Gas poured into the vault. It was a heavy green nerve toxin. It was designed to knock out orcs. Aang coughed. He tried to blow the gas away with a spin of air. He created a small tornado in the room. The gas swirled into a tight ball, but there was nowhere to send it. The room was sealed. Aang held his breath. He was a master of breath control. He could hold his breath for minutes, but the gas burned his eyes. It soaked into his skin. His knees felt weak. The tornado faded. He fell to the floor. The world went dark again. 3 days later, the black ship arrived. It was called the Silent Judgment. It was a massive vessel shaped like a cathedral with guns. It blocked out the stars. A shuttle flew down to the Goliath's burden. A ramp lowered. Steam hissed. A man walked out. He was tall and thin. He wore long leather robes and a wide-brimmed hat. His face was scarred. One of his eyes was a red bionic lens. This was Inquisitor Silas Vane. He was a hunter of witches. He did not smile. He walked with a heavy iron staff. Behind him marched 5 stormtroopers. They wore thick carapace armor and carried hell guns. Their faces were hidden behind masks. Commander Hector met them in the docking bay. Hector looked nervous. His uniform was dirty. He had not slept well. He handed a data slate to the Inquisitor. Vane looked at the data. He saw the video of the boy stopping the laser beam. His bionic eye whirred. He did not look impressed. He looked suspicious. He asked where the prisoner was. Hector pointed to the cargo vault. Vane signaled his men. They marched to the vault. A tech priest with a metal arm used a laser cutter to open the door. The metal fell away with a clang. Aang was awake again. The gas had worn off. He sat in the corner, hugging his knees. He looked up at the new people. They looked scary. Vane stepped into the room. He held up a device called a psychic hood. It was meant to protect him from magic. He waited for the boy to attack. Aang did not attack. He stood up slowly. He bowed. It was a traditional air nomad bow. It was a sign of peace. Vane did not know this sign. He thought the boy was casting a spell. Vane raised his staff. The tip of the staff crackled with electricity. He spoke in High Gothic. He demanded to know the boy's name. Aang did not understand the words. The language was harsh and guttural. It sounded like rocks grinding together. Aang tried to speak. He asked where his friends were. Vayne heard only gibberish. He nodded to his stormtroopers. 2 of them moved forward. They grabbed Aang's arms. Aang did not fight back. He was a pacifist. He let them lead him out of the vault. They walked through the corridors of the ship. Aang looked around. He saw servitors. Servitors are half human, half machine slaves. Their minds are wiped. They have mechanical tools instead of hands. Aang saw a man with a broom for a hand. He saw a woman with wires coming out of her eyes. He felt sick. The air felt heavy with sadness. This world was wrong. They brought him to the shuttle. They flew him to the black ship. The silent judgment was even worse than the transport. It was a prison for souls. The walls were lined with cages. Inside the cages were people who could use magic. They were called Psykers. Some were crying. Some were mad. Some were just children. They were being taken to Terra to be fed to the Golden Throne. Aang did not know this. He only felt their fear. It hit him like a physical wave. He stumbled. The guards dragged him to an interrogation room. It was a dark circle with a metal chair in the center. They strapped him into the chair. The restraints were made of cold iron. They were inscribed with runes to dampen power. Vayne entered the room. He brought a specialist with him. The specialist was an old woman. She was a sanctioned psyker. She had been trained to use her mind as a weapon. She was blind, but she could see thoughts. Vayne ordered her to rip the truth from the boy. The woman placed her hands on Aang's head. Aang flinched. He felt a cold spike enter his brain. It was not like telepathy in his world. It was violent. It felt like someone was digging in his memories with a rusty spoon. The woman gasped. She saw images. She saw a world of blue oceans and green forests. She saw flying bison. She saw temples in the clouds. She saw the boy glowing with light. She saw him bending the elements. She screamed. She pulled her hands away. Her nose was bleeding. She told Vayne that the boy was ancient. She said his mind was not from this time. She said he was not a normal psyker. He did not draw power from the warp. He drew power from the world itself. Vayne did not believe her. The warp is the only source of magic in the galaxy. He thought the boy was a trick of chaos. He thought the boy was a demon in human skin. Vayne decided to test the boy himself. He pressed a button. The floor of the room electrified. Pain shot through Aang's body. Aang cried out. The pain was sharp. It stopped. Vayne asked a question. The old woman translated it telepathically into Aang's mind. The question was simple. What are you? Aang answered. He said he was the Avatar. He said he brought balance. The woman translated this back to Vayne. Vayne frowned. The word Avatar was heresy. In the Imperium, only the Emperor is the master of mankind. To call oneself an Avatar is to claim to be a god. This was a death sentence. Vayne increased the voltage. The pain was worse. Aang gritted his teeth. He felt fear turning into panic. His instincts took over. He pulled against the iron cuffs. They were strong, but the chair was bolted to the floor with screws. Aang focused on the screws. In his world, he had learned that metal is just refined earth. Toph had taught him. He could feel the vibrations in the metal. He focused his energy. He did not use the warp. He used the earth. The screws vibrated. They twisted. They popped out of the floor. The chair came loose. Vayne saw the chair move. He drew his bolt pistol. He fired a warning shot. The bullet was a rocket. It exploded against the wall. Aang did not like loud noises. He reacted. He kicked his leg out. A blade of compressed air shot from his foot. It hit the table in front of Vane. The heavy steel table flew across the room. It pinned the Inquisitor against the wall. The stormtroopers rushed in. They raised their hell guns. Lasers filled the room. Red beams of light cut the air. Aang dodged. He moved like a leaf in the wind. He was fast, much faster than the soldiers. He spun in a circle. He created an air sphere around himself. The laser shots hit the sphere and scattered. They burned holes in the ceiling. Aang did not want to hurt them. He just wanted to leave. He pushed his hands forward. A gust of wind slammed into the soldiers. It was like a hurricane. It threw them into the hallway. Their armor clattered against the deck. Aang ran. He ran through the corridors of the black ship. The ship was a maze. Alarms blared. Red lights flashed. Servitors stumbled out of alcoves to stop him. Aang jumped over them. He ran up the walls. He used the air to boost his jumps. He was looking for a window. He wanted to see where he was. He found a viewing port. He looked out. He stopped. His heart broke. Outside was not a planet. It was deep space. The stars were distant and cold. Nearby, a massive tear in reality was visible. It was purple and bruised. It was the Eye of Terror, though Aang did not know the name. He realized he was not on his world anymore. He was nowhere. The despair hit him hard. He fell to his knees. Tears ran down his face. He was just a boy. He wanted Mount Gyatso. He wanted Katara. He was alone in a hell made of metal. Behind him, heavy footsteps approached. It was a squad of Space Marines. They were from the Red Scorpions chapter. They were escorting the black ship. Space Marines are not normal men. They are giants. They are 8 feet tall. They wear power armor that can stop a tank shell. They move with terrifying speed. The sergeant saw the boy. He saw the tattoos. He saw the crying. He did not feel pity. He felt duty. He aimed his bolter. The gun was the size of a child's torso. "Submit," the Space Marine boomed. His voice was amplified by a grill. Aang turned around. He wiped his eyes. He saw the giants. He felt their intent to kill. He did not submit. He stood up. He took a stance. The air in the corridor grew cold. Frost formed on the pipes. Aang pulled water from the air. There was moisture in the recycled atmosphere. He condensed it. A ring of water formed around him. He froze it into sharp icicles. The Space Marine fired. The bolt round flew at supersonic speed. Aang did not try to block it with air. He stepped aside. The round exploded behind him. The shockwave rattled his teeth. Aang pushed the icicles. They flew like arrows. They hit the Space Marine's armor. They shattered. The armor was too thick. Ceramite is stronger than ice. The Space Marine did not even flinch. He kept walking. He grabbed Aang by the throat. The grip was like a hydraulic press. Aang could not breathe. He kicked and struggled. The Marine lifted him one-handed. "Subject secured," the Marine said into his Vox bead. But Aang was not done. The lack of air triggered his survival reflex. His tattoos began to glow. First a dull white, then a blinding brilliance. The Avatar state triggered. But in the 41st millennium, the Avatar state connects to the cosmic energy of the universe. In this galaxy, the cosmic energy is the warp. Aang opened a door he could not close. A beam of pure white light shot up from the ship. It punched through the hull. It went into space. It was a beacon. The Space Marine dropped him. The armor of the Marine's gauntlet was burning. The metal was white hot. The Marine stepped back. "Psyker level rising," he reported. "Alpha class, extremis." The light did not just burn. It sang. It sent a ripple through the Imperium. Aang was a bright candle in a dark room, and things in the dark like candles. The ship's Geller field flickered. The Geller field protects ships from demons. The surge from Aang disrupted the generator. The lights on the ship died. Gravity failed for a second. Shadows detached themselves from the walls. They were not normal shadows. They were never born. Demons. Small ones at first. Nurglings. They giggled and dripped slime. Then larger ones. Horrors of Tzeentch. They were made of shifting pink fire. They screamed and threw fireballs. The crew of the black ship began to panic. The Space Marines opened fire. Their bolters roared. Explosions lit up the hallway. Aang hovered in the air. He was in the Avatar state. He saw the monsters. He knew they were evil. He did not know what they were, but he knew they had to go. He did not use the 4 elements. He used energy bending. He gathered the light in his hands. He fired a beam of spirit energy at the daemons. The beam hit a pink horror. The demon did not just die. It vanished. It was erased from existence. Usually, demons just go back to the warp when they die. But Aang's power was different. It was anathema. It was pure order. It cleansed the corruption. The Space Marines saw this. They stopped firing for a microsecond. They had never seen a Psyker erase a demon. Usually, fighting demons is a messy war of attrition. This boy wiped them away like dirt on a window. Inquisitor Vane arrived at the scene. He was limping. He saw the floating boy. He saw the white light. He saw the demons burning away. His logical mind tried to process it. The boy was a dangerous, uncontrolled Psyker. The Codex said kill him. But the boy was destroying the enemies of man with a purity Vane had never seen. It looked like the light of the Emperor. Vane hesitated. This was a strategic choice. If he killed the boy, the demons might overrun the ship. If he let the boy fight, the boy might destroy the ship later. Vane made his choice. Cover him, he shouted to the Space Marines. Let him purge the breach. The Space Marines obeyed. They formed a defensive ring around Aang. They shot any demon that got too close. Aang floated forward. He was a storm of light. He moved through the ship. He went to the engine room. The Geller field generator was covered in slime. A large demon, a plague bearer, was hacking at the machine with a rusted sword. It had one eye and was surrounded by flies. Aang raised his hand. He pulled the water from the demon's body. The demon dried up instantly. It turned to dust. Aang then placed his hand on the generator. He did not know engineering, but he could feel the energy flow. He sensed the blockage. He bent the energy like water. He pushed the current back into alignment. The generator hummed. The lights flickered back on. The Geller field stabilized. The shadows screamed and vanished. The reality of the ship became solid again. Aang dropped to the floor. The glow faded from his tattoos. He was exhausted. He curled up into a ball. He was shivering. The Space Marines stood over him. Their weapons were still raised. They waited for orders. Inquisitor Vane walked up. He looked at the boy. He looked at the generator. He looked at the dust where the demon had been. Vane took out a pair of shackles. These were different. They were gold. They were engraved with hexagrammatic wards from the vaults of terror. They were designed to hold greater demons. Vane knelt down. He clamped the shackles onto Aang's wrists and ankles. Aang was too weak to resist. He looked at Vane with tired eyes. "Why?" Aang whispered. The telepath was not there to translate, but the meaning was clear. Vane did not answer. He stood up. He keyed his Vox speed. "Captain," he said to the ship's commander, "set course for Terra. Priority Vermilion. I have a package for the High Lords." Vane knew he had broken protocol. He should have executed the boy, but he was a radical at heart. He saw a weapon that could clean the warp. a weapon that could save the Imperium or destroy it. He was willing to take the risk. The journey to Terra would take months. Vayne would use that time. He would break the boy. He would teach him High Gothic. He would teach him the Imperial Creed. He would turn the Avatar into a soldier. Aang was dragged back to a new cell. This one had no windows. The walls were lined with null stone. It dampened his connection to the elements. He could not feel the air. He could not feel the metal. He felt empty. He lay in the dark. He touched the cold floor. He missed the sun. He missed his friends. He closed his eyes and tried to meditate. But when he entered the spirit world, he did not see the spirits of nature. He saw the chaos gods watching him. A great red eye stared from the darkness. A laughing god mocked him. A rotting grandfather wheezed. A prince of pleasure whispered. They had seen him. The Avatar had entered the great game, and everyone wanted to play. The ship's engines roared. The Goliath's burden was left behind. The silent judgment entered the warp. The nightmare had only just begun. The food was a grey paste that tasted like ash. Every day, a servitor brought it. Every day, Aang tried to talk to it. The servitor only stared with dead, glass eyes. Aang marked the days by the meals. 1, 2, 10, 20. He started to exercise. He did his airbending forms without air. He moved through the stances. Bagua, Tai Chi. He kept his body moving. If he stopped moving, the despair would eat him. He needed to be ready. He did not know for what, but he knew he had to survive. 1 month into the journey, Vayne came to the cell. He brought a book. It was a heavy tome bound in leather. The title was The Imperial Primer. He threw it on the floor. He brought a logic slate that taught language. Learn, Vayne said, or die. Aang picked up the book. He looked at the pictures. He saw soldiers dying for a golden man on a throne. He saw cities burning. He saw hate. It was the opposite of everything the monks had taught him. But he opened the slate. He started to learn the words. Emperor, heretic, Xenos, exterminatus. He learned quickly. He was the Avatar. His mind was sharp. He learned that humanity was fighting a war for survival. He learned that mercy was considered a weakness. He learned that he was a monster in their eyes. He decided to play the role. He would learn their ways. He would learn their language. And then he would find a way to change them. Or he would escape. But deep down, Aang felt a crack in his spirit. The killing of the demons had felt good. It felt righteous. That scared him more than the prison. The Avatar is a bridge between humans and spirits. But in this universe, the spirits are monsters. What does the bridge become then? A fortress? A weapon? Aang did not know. He sat in the dark, and for the first time in 100 years, he was truly afraid of himself. The vibration of the ship's engines was the only sound he heard. It was a low, constant growl, a reminder that he was moving deeper into the belly of the beast. The road to Terra was long, and the Inquisition had many questions. The education of Subject 808, formerly known as Aang, began in the dark. Inquisitor Vayne did not use a classroom. He used a cell with a single light bulb. He did not use textbooks. He used pain and repetition. Vayne knew that the boy was powerful, but power without control is a bomb waiting to explode. The Imperium does not like random bombs. It likes guided missiles. Vayne wanted to turn the Avatar into a missile. Every morning, the routine was the same. A servitor brought a bowl of protein gruel. Aang ate it. It tasted like wet cardboard. Then Vayne entered. He carried a rod made of silver. It was a neural whip. If Aang gave the wrong answer, Vayne pushed a button. The whip sent a shock of pain directly to Aang's nerves. It did not leave a mark on the skin. It only hurt the mind. Vane taught Aang the history of the galaxy. He spoke of the Horus heresy. He explained how half of the Emperor's sons turned against him. He explained that there is no such thing as peace. There is only war. Aang tried to argue. He said that all life is sacred. He said that violence creates more violence. Vane pressed the button. Aang fell to the floor, shaking. Vane waited for him to stand up. Then he explained again. In the grim darkness of the far future, mercy is a crime. If you spare an enemy, they will come back to kill your family. If you spare a heretic, they will doom an entire planet. Aang learned to be quiet. He learned to hide his true thoughts. He realized that Vane was not evil in the way Firelord Ozai was evil. Ozai wanted power for himself. Vane wanted humanity to survive. Vane was driven by fear. The whole Imperium was driven by fear. They were afraid of the dark. They were afraid of the alien. They were afraid of themselves. Aang felt pity for them. But he also felt the weight of their logic. He had seen the diamonds on the ship. He knew that some things could not be reasoned with. You cannot negotiate with a plague. Weeks turned into months. The silent judgment moved through the warp. The warp is the dimension of souls. It is an ocean of energy. To Aang, it felt like a constant headache. He could hear voices scratching at the walls of the ship. He could feel the emotions of the crew. They were miserable. The navigator in the high tower guided the ship, but the journey was rough. The currents of the warp were angry. One day, the lessons changed. Vane took Aang to the gunnery deck. He wanted to test Aang's combat reflexes. He did not give Aang a weapon. He put Aang in a circle of sand. He released 3 combat servitors. These were mindless drones with blades for arms. They were programmed to kill. Aang dodged. He moved like air. He spun and ducked. The blades missed him by inches. Aang pushed the servitors away with blasts of wind. He did not break them. He just kept them away. Vane watched from a balcony. He was not satisfied. He spoke into a microphone. He ordered the servitors to increase speed. The machines moved faster. Their blades whirred. Aang got a cut on his arm. He winced. He trapped one servitor in a sphere of compressed air. He tripped the second one with a gust of wind at its ankles. The third one lunged. Aang jumped over it. He landed on its back. He pulled out its power cable. The machine died. Vane stopped the test. He walked down to the sand. He looked at the cut on Aang's arm. He looked at the disabled servitors. He was angry. He told Aang that he was holding back. He said that in a real battle, hesitation is death. Aang said he did not want to destroy. Vane slapped him. It was not a hard slap, but it was cold. He told Aang that he had a duty. He had the power to save billions. If he refused to use it because of his own ego, he was a traitor. Aang looked at the floor. He did not know how to answer. The monk's teachings felt very far away. The catastrophe happened 2 days later. It started with a whisper. A crewman named Jace was working in the engine room. Jace was a loyal worker. He had served for 20 years. But the warp finds cracks in the soul. Jace had been hearing a voice in his dreams. The voice told him that the Emperor was a liar. The voice told him that true freedom lay outside the ship. The voice was Lorgar, the Primarch of the Word-Bearers. The Word-Bearers are Chaos Space Marines who worship the Dark Gods with religious zeal. They had sensed the burst of light when Aang entered the Avatar state. They were hunting the ship. Jace walked to the Geller field generator. He held a wrench. He did not look crazy. He looked calm. He walked up to the main power coupling. He loosened a bolt. Then he smashed a delicate glass tube filled with mercury. The machine spirit of the generator shrieked. Alarms blared throughout the ship. The Geller field flickered. It did not fail completely, but it developed a hole. Aang was in his cell when the alarm went off. He felt the change instantly. The air pressure dropped. The temperature fell. The shadows in the corner of his room grew teeth. He stood up. The door to his cell unlocked automatically. This was a failsafe. If the ship was lost, the prisoners were meant to be executed. But the system malfunctioned. The door just opened. Aang ran into the corridor. It was chaos. The lights were flashing red. Soldiers were running. But they were not fighting demons this time. They were fighting each other. The corruption had spread instantly. Crew members with weak wills turned on their friends. They shouted praises to the dark gods. They carved symbols into their flesh. Aang saw a stormtrooper shoot a tech priest. Aang blasted the gun out of the soldier's hand with air. He pinned the man to the wall. The man was foaming at the mouth. His eyes were black. He was gone. Aang left him and ran toward the bridge. He knew Vayne would be there. The ship lurched. It felt like hitting a wall. The navigator had initiated an emergency translation. He ripped the ship out of the warp. They re-entered real space. The stars returned. The diamonds faded. But the danger did not stop. The silent judgment had emerged in the Mandeville point of a dead system. A red sun burned in the distance. Floating near the ship was another vessel. It was ugly. It was covered in spikes and chains. It was painted dark red and silver. It was a cruiser of the Word-Bearers Legion. It was called the Catechism of Blood. The enemy ship opened fire. Massive macro cannon shells slammed into the silent judgment. The black ship shook. Gravity failed. Aang floated in the hallway. He grabbed a pipe to steady himself. He saw a window. He saw the enemy ship launch boarding torpedoes. They looked like giant claws. They flew across the void and smashed into the hull of the black ship. The Red Scorpion Space Marines moved to intercept. They were led by Sergeant Karras. They set up a barricade in the main cargo bay. They knew the enemy would try to take the prisoner vault. They did not know Aang was loose. Aang reached the bridge. The heavy blast doors were closed. He could hear gunfire inside. He used earthbending to sense the metal. He found the locking mechanism. He shifted the tumblers. The doors slid open. Inside, Inquisitor Vayne was fighting. He was using his power sword and his bolt pistol. He was fighting the bridge crew. Half of them had mutinied. Vayne saw Aang. He did not look surprised. He shouted for Aang to help. A traitor officer charged at Vayne with a knife. Aang reacted. He did not kill the man. He pulled the air out of the man's lungs. The man collapsed, gasping. Aang pushed him aside. "We are boarded," Vayne said. He was bleeding from a head wound. "Traitor Astartes, word-bearers, they want you." Aang looked at the view screen. He saw the red ship. He felt a dark presence coming from it. It felt like the opposite of the Avatar spirit. It was heavy and oily. "Why?" Aang asked. "To use you," Vayne said. "To turn you into a gateway for their gods. We cannot let them take the ship. We must purge the borders." Aang nodded. He did not like it, but he understood. He followed Vayne out of the bridge. They headed for the cargo bay. The sounds of war grew louder. Bolter fire sounded like thunder. Chainzirds screamed like angry insects. They arrived at the cargo bay. It was a slaughterhouse. The Red Scorpions were fighting the Word-Bearers. The Word-Bearers were terrifying. Their armor was inscribed with glowing runes. Pages of human skin with cursed text were pinned to their shoulder pads. They shouted prayers as they killed. They did not fight like soldiers. They fought like fanatics. A giant word-bearer with a horned helmet saw them. He was a dark apostle. He carried a heavy mace that glowed with purple energy. He pointed at Aang. The pilgrim, the Dark Apostle, roared. His voice was amplified. It hurt Aang's ears. Seize him. Lorga demands his soul. 3 word-bearers charged. They ignored the red scorpions. They ran straight for Aang. They were fast, faster than the wind. Aang realized he could not just dodge. He had to fight. He looked around. The cargo bay was full of crates, heavy metal crates. Aang took a stance. He stomped his foot. The deck plates buckled. He kicked a crate. It flew through the air. It weighed 2 tons. It hit the lead word-bearer in the chest. The Space Marine was knocked backward, but he did not die. He stood up. His chest armor was dented, but unbroken. He laughed. "Is that your god's power?" the Marine mocked. Aang was shocked. In his world, that hit would have stopped a tank. Here, it just annoyed the enemy. Aang switched tactics. He used fire. There was a ruptured fuel line nearby. Aang bent the fire. He created a whip of flames. He lashed out. The fire wrapped around the Marine's helmet. The lenses melted. The Marine roared in annoyance, but the armor's cooling systems kicked in. The fire did not burn him enough. The red scorpions fired their bolters at the distracted enemy. Explosive rounds hit the word-bearer's joints. His leg blew apart. He fell. A red scorpion finished him with a chainsaw to the neck. "Focus, boy," Sergeant Karras shouted. "Aim for the joints, or crush them." Aang understood. He needed more pressure. He needed to be lethal. The Dark Apostle was getting closer. He was chanting a spell. A purple fog began to fill the room. The fog smelled of sulfur. Demon faces formed in the smoke. The red scorpions started to choke. Their armor seals could not stop the sorcery. Vayne raised his psychic hood. He tried to block the spell. Sparks flew from his equipment. "I cannot hold it," Vayne yelled. "He is summoning a breach." Aang felt the spiritual pressure. The barrier between worlds was thinning. If the Dark Apostle finished the chant, the room would fill with demons. Aang had to stop the voice. He took a deep breath. He entered the avatar state. His eyes glowed white. The tattoos glowed. He rose into the air. The air in the room stopped moving. The sound of battle faded. Aang focused on the air inside the Dark Apostle's helmet. He did not blast it. He solidified it. He turned the air into a solid block. The Dark Apostle choked. His chant stopped. The purple fog vanished. The Apostle clawed at his throat. He dropped his mace. Aang did not stop. He was in the avatar state. He was the combined wisdom of 1,000 lives. But none of his past lives had fought Space Marines. He had to improvise. He grabbed the Dark Apostle with invisible hands of air. He lifted the giant warrior. He slammed him into the ceiling, then into the floor, then into the wall. The armor cracked. The ceramic plates shattered. The man inside was crushed. Aang dropped the body. It was a wet heap of red metal and meat. The other word-bearers saw their leader fall. They did not run. They became more aggressive. They were furious. They opened fire on Aang. A dozen bolters fired at once. Aang spun a cocoon of elements. Fire, air, water from the ruptured pipes, and metal from the deck. The bullets hit the shield and exploded. Smoke filled the bay. Aang pushed the shield outwards. It expanded like a bomb. It hit the word-bearers. It threw them back into the boarding torpedoes. "Seal the breach," Vayne ordered. Sergeant Karras threw a melter bomb into the boarding tube. He detonated it. The tube collapsed. The hull was sealed. The remaining word-bearers were trapped on the ship. They were cut down by the red scorpions. Silence returned to the bay. It was a heavy, wet silence. Aang floated down. The glow faded. He looked at the body of the Dark Apostle. He looked at the dead red scorpions. He felt sick. He had killed. He had crushed a man inside his own armor. It was brutal. It was not the air nomad way. Vayne walked up to him. Vayne was limping. "You did well," the Inquisitor said. "I killed him," Aang whispered. "You executed a monster," Vayne corrected. "He would have skinned you alive and worn your face as a mask. Do not waste tears on the traitor." Suddenly, the ship shook again. A massive explosion rocked the hull. The word-bearer's ship, the Catechism of Blood, had fired its main lance battery. It hit the engines of the Silent Judgment. The lights died completely. Emergency red mood lighting flickered on. The gravity failed. Everyone floated. "Report," Vayne yelled into his vox bead. "Engines critical," the bridge officer replied. His voice was static. "Plasma drive is leaking. We are losing containment. If we do not eject the core, we will detonate." "Eject it," Vayne ordered. "We cannot," the officer screamed. "The release clamps are fused." The lance strike melted the mechanism. Vayne looked at Aang. There was no time for debate. "Can you move metal?" Vayne asked. Aang nodded. "Yes." "The engine core is a sun in a bottle," Vayne said rapidly. "It is going to explode. The clamps are stuck. You must open them. Now." They ran. They floated through the corridors. They reached the engineering deck. The heat was unbearable. Radiation warnings were screaming. The tech priests were dead or fleeing. The engine core was a massive pillar of blue fire behind a thick glass wall. It was pulsing. It was going to blow in seconds. Aang looked at the clamps. They were massive claws of adamantium holding the core in place. They were glowing red hot. The metal had melted and fused together. "I need to get closer," Aang said. "The radiation will kill you," Vayne said. "If I don't, we all die," Aang said. He did not wait for permission. He airbended the blast door open. He entered the chamber. The heat hit him like a physical punch. His skin blistered instantly. He could feel the radiation tearing at his cells. He ignored the pain. He focused on the clamps. He needed to be tough. He needed to be strong. He took a stance. He reached out with his mind. He felt the metal. It was stubborn. It was angry. He pulled. He groaned. His muscles strained. The clamps groaned. The fused metal began to crack. "Come on," Aang yelled. His tattoos glowed. He went into the avatar state again. He needed the power. He poured cosmic energy into the metal. With a massive screech of tearing steel, the clamps ripped open. The engine core was released. The emergency vents opened. The core was ejected into space behind the ship. Aang collapsed. Vayne ran in and dragged him out. They slammed the blast door shut. Seconds later, a flash of white light filled the void outside. The engine core exploded. The shockwave hit the Silent Judgment. The ship was tossed like a toy. It spun out of control. It was hurled away from the word-bearer's ship. It was thrown toward the nearby planet. The planet was a feral world. It was covered in jungles and volcanoes. The Silent Judgment entered the atmosphere. It was a burning meteor. On the bridge, the pilot fought the controls. Brace for impact. Aang was drifting in and out of consciousness. He felt the heat of re-entry. He felt the ship shaking apart. He felt Vayne strapping him into a crash seat. "Stay with me, Asset," Vayne growled. "You are not allowed to die." The ship smashed into the jungle canopy. Trees snapped like twigs. The hull ploughed a furrow through the earth for 10 miles. Metal tore. The bridge window shattered. Mud and vines flew inside. Then everything stopped. The silence was absolute. Dust hung in the air. The ship was dead. It was dark. Aang opened his eyes. He was hanging upside down in his seat. He was alive. He looked over at Vayne. The Inquisitor was unconscious. A piece of shrapnel was lodged in his shoulder. Aang unbuckled his belt. He fell to the ceiling, which was now the floor. He coughed. He smelled smoke and wet earth. He crawled to the broken window. He looked out. It was night. The jungle was alive with sounds, strange bird calls, roars of predators. Giant insects buzzed near the wreckage. But it was not just nature. Aang looked up at the sky. Through the smoke, he saw the stars, and he saw something else. Drop pods were falling from the sky, fiery streaks of rain. The word bearers had not given up. They were coming down to the surface. They were coming to finish the job. Aang touched the cold metal of the ship. He realized the strategic situation. The ship was destroyed. The engines were gone. The distress beacon was likely broken. They were crashed on a hostile world. An army of super soldiers was coming to hunt them, and the only people who could fight were a handful of battered red scorpions and a wounded Inquisitor. Aang looked at his hands. They were burned from the radiation. He felt weak, but he also felt something new. Determination. In the past, he ran from the Fire Nation. He froze himself to escape the responsibility. He had always looked for a peaceful way out, but Vane's voice echoed in his head. There is no peace. There is only survival. Aang climbed back into the bridge. He went to Vane. He placed his hand on the Inquisitor's chest. He checked for a heartbeat. It was there. Weak, but there. Aang used water from his own canteen. He used water bending to heal the wound. He pulled the blood away. He closed the cut. It was not a perfect heal, but it stopped the bleeding. Vane woke up with a gasp. He reached for his gun instantly. We crashed, Aang said. His voice was flat. They are coming. Vane looked around. He assessed the situation in a second. The word bearers. Yes, Aang said. I saw the drop pods. Vane nodded. He stood up, wincing. We need to rally the survivors. We need to fortify the wreckage. We cannot run. No, Aang said. Vane looked at him. What? If we stay here, we die, Aang said. The ship is a trap. They will bomb it from orbit if they can't take it. We need to move. We need to vanish into the jungle. We need to become the hunters. Vane stared at the boy. He saw a change in the eyes. The innocence was fractured. The grey eyes were harder. The avatar was learning the rules of the 41st millennium. Guerrilla warfare, Vane said. Acceptable. They gathered the survivors. Only 5 red scorpions remained. Sergeant Karras was alive, but his armor was damaged. 10 naval armsmen survived. The rest were dead. They took what weapons they could carry. They took rations. They took the data slate with the astropathic codes. They left the burning wreckage of the Silent Judgment. They walked into the dark jungle. The trees were massive with leaves as sharp as knives. The mud sucked at their boots. Aang walked in the center of the formation. He did not float. He walked. He wanted to feel the earth. He wanted to know where the enemy was. High above, the word-bearer's Thunderhawk gunship screamed over the crash site. Searchlights swept the forest. The hunt had begun. Aang gripped a piece of metal he had taken from the ship. It was a long, sharp rod, a makeshift staff. It wasn't his glider. It was a spear. He looked at the red moon through the trees. He whispered a quiet apology to Monk Gyatso. Then he turned to Sergeant Karras. Where is the best place to ambush them? Aang asked. Karras looked down at the small boy. The giant space marine nodded slowly. The ravine up ahead. Choke point. Good, Aang said. Let's go. The catastrophe was complete. The mission to reach Terra had failed. The safety of the ship was gone. Now there was only the jungle, the night, and the enemy. The war for survival had started. The ambush at the ravine was not a battle. It was an execution. The red scorpions had positioned themselves high on the ridge. They were hidden in the dense ferns. Their armor was painted with mud to mask their colors. Aang was down in the mud. He was the bait. He sat in the center of the narrow pass. He looked small and weak. He held his metal staff. He waited. The rain fell hard. It was a hot tropical rain that smelled of sulfur. The water ran down his bald head. It soaked into his orange and yellow clothes. He did not shiver. He controlled his body temperature with breathing. The word bearers came first as a sound. Heavy footsteps crushed the rocks. The motors of their power armor growled. There were 5 of them. They were hunting. They scanned the jungle with red eye lenses. They saw the boy. They did not shoot immediately. They wanted to capture him. The dark gods wanted the avatar alive. The leader of the squad signaled. 2 Marines moved forward with chainswords. The other 3 aimed their bolters. Aang closed his eyes. He felt the earth beneath the mud. He felt the vibrations of the heavy boots. He waited for them to step on the weak point. It was a section of the ravine floor that sat above a hollow cavern. Toph had taught him to listen to the earth. The earth told him where to strike. When the lead Marine was 5 meters away, Aang opened his eyes. They did not glow. They were flat and grey. He stomped his foot. The ground did not just shake. It liquefied. Aang turned the solid rock into quicksand. The 2 forward Marines sank instantly. They thrashed. Their heavy armor dragged them down. They fired their weapons in panic. Bullets hit the sky. Aang twisted his wrists. The earth snapped shut around them. It hardened instantly. It crushed their legs and trapped them up to their waists. They were stuck. Now, Aang whispered. On the ridge, Sergeant Karras gave the order. The red scorpions opened fire. They used plasma guns. Balls of blue sunfire shot down from the cliffs. They hit the 3 Marines who were still standing. The plasma melted through the ceramite armor. It cooked the flesh inside. The traitor Marines died without firing a shot. The 2 trapped Marines tried to pull themselves out. Karras jumped down from the ridge. He landed with a heavy thud. He raised his bolt pistol. He put a single round into the head of each trapped traitor. The ravine fell silent. Inquisitor Vayne walked out of the jungle. He leaned on a stick. His face was pale. The infection in his shoulder was getting worse. He looked at the dead enemies. He looked at Aang. Aang was standing over a corpse. He was not praying. He was taking the enemy's grenades. Good effect on target, Vayne said. His voice was raspy. We move. Their brothers will hear the shots. They marched for 3 days. The jungle was a nightmare. The plants were carnivorous. Vines tried to strangle the naval armsmen while they slept. Aang had to cut the vines with air blades. The insects were the size of hands. They bit through cloth. The humidity was suffocating. Their boots rotted on their feet. The naval armsmen started to die. One died from fever. Another was eaten by a reptile that looked like a log. Aang could not save them all. He tried to heal them with water bending, but he could not cure the alien bacteria. He watched them die. Each death took a piece of his hope. They reached the foothills of a volcano. The mountain was jagged and black. Smoke rose from the peak. Karras wanted to go up. He said the radiation from the volcano would hide their energy signatures. It would blind the sensors of the enemy ship. It was a good tactical choice, but it was a hard climb. As they climbed, Aang felt something wrong. The mountain was not just a geological formation. It felt hollow. It felt artificial. The vibrations in the rock were too regular. It was like a machine sleeping under the stone. He told Vayne. Vayne listened. The Inquisitor was a scholar. He knew that many worlds in the galaxy were built on top of ancient secrets. Necrons, Vayne whispered. Or Eldar. Keep moving. Do not disturb the sleep of the mountain. They made camp in a cave, halfway up the slope. They had a view of the jungle below. That night, the sky burned. The word-bearers were not just hunting. They were terraforming. Aang saw massive pillars of fire rising from the forest floor. The enemy was burning the jungle in a geometric pattern. It was an 8-pointed star, the symbol of chaos. They were sacrificing the biosphere of the planet to summon help. Aang stood at the edge of the cave. The wind brought the smell of burning wood and burning animals. He felt the pain of the spirits. The planet was screaming. In his old life, Aang would have cried. He would have flown down to stop the fire. Now, he analyzed the tactical map. They are weakening the veil, Vayne said. He sat by a small fire. He was cleaning his bolt pistol. They are turning the planet into a demon world. If they finish the ritual, the warp will consume this rock, and us with it. How do we stop it? Aang asked. We kill the summoners, Karis said. The Space Marine was sharpening his combat knife. But there are hundreds of them, and we are 6. Aang looked at the volcano. He looked at the burning jungle. He saw the geometry. The center of the star was a large valley 10 miles away. That was where the main ritual was happening. I can stop them, Aang said. Karis looked up. How? The lava, Aang said. The mountain is full of it. If I release the pressure, I can redirect the flow. I can flood the valley. Vayne stared at the boy. You want to cause an eruption? You will kill everything in that valley. The trees, the animals, the ecosystem. The fire is already killing them, Aang said. His voice was cold. If the warp takes the planet, everything suffers forever. If I burn the valley, the suffering ends. Vayne smiled. It was a grim, bloody smile. You are learning. Subject 808. This is the logic of exterminatus. Better to burn a limb than lose the body. The plan was set. They would climb to the crater. Aang would bend the lava. It was a dangerous plan. If Aang lost control, he would kill his own team. But they had no choice. The climb to the summit took another day. The air grew thin. The heat was intense. The naval armsmen collapsed. They could not go on. Vayne ordered them to stay behind in a sheltered crevice. He gave them a grenade. He told them not to be taken alive. It was a mercy. Aang did not argue. He knew they would slow him down. Aang, Vayne, and the 5 red scorpions reached the rim of the crater. The lake of lava bubbled below. It was white hot. The heat was enough to melt lead. Aang took a deep breath. He needed the avatar state. But he did not need the light. He needed the power. He focused. He drew the heat into his body. He redirected it. Below them, in the valley, the word-bearers were chanting. They had built a tower of skulls. A portal was opening in the air above the tower. Demons were pushing through. The sky was turning purple. Aang reached out to the magma. He was Roku. He was Kyoshi. He moved his arms in a slow, heavy rhythm. He felt the weight of the molten rock. He pulled. The wall of the crater cracked. A stream of lava burst out. It was a river of fire. It flowed down the mountain. It gained speed. It destroyed everything in its path. It hit the jungle. It burned a straight line toward the valley. The word-bearers saw it coming. They tried to stop it with sorcery. They threw bolts of warp energy at the lava. But lava is earth. It is physical. It is real. The warp magic fizzled against the sheer mass of the rock. The river of fire slammed into the ritual site. The tower of skulls melted. The cultists screamed as they burned. The portal destabilized. The demons were dragged back into the warp. The ritual was broken. Aang dropped to his knees. He was exhausted. The Red Scorpions cheered. It was a victory. But every action in the 41st millennium has a consequence. The lava did not just burn the word-bearers. It flowed into deep crevices in the valley floor. It poured into the hollow spaces beneath the crust. It disturbed the thing that was sleeping. The ground began to shake. This was not an earthquake. This was a mechanical activation. Green lightning shot up from the cracks in the ground. The lava river stopped flowing. It was being pushed back by a force field. "What did you do?" Kara shouted. He was looking at his sensors. Energy spike, massive. From the smoke in the valley, shapes emerged. They were not men. They were metal skeletons. They glowed with an eerie green light. They held long rifles that stripped atoms from molecules. Necrons. Aang had woken a tomb world. The planet was not feral. It was a tomb of the Sarkhan dynasty. The word-bearer's sorcery had annoyed the machine spirits. But Aang's lava attack had breached their crypts. Now the ancient lords were awake, and they wanted their lawn cleared. The word-bearers who survived the lava were now fighting the Necrons. Green beams of goose energy vaporized the space marines. The Chaos forces panicked. They were caught between the volcano and the undying legions. "New objective," Vane said. He was looking at the carnage with horror. "We have started a three-way war. We need to leave. Now." But the Necrons were not just in the valley. They were waking up everywhere. Metal scarabs, small beetle-like machines, began to crawl out of the rocks near the crater. Millions of them. They ate matter. They ate rock. They ate flesh. "Scarabs," Karis yelled. "Defensive formation." The Red Scorpions opened fire. Their bolters blew the scarabs apart. But for every one they killed, 10 more appeared. It was a metallic tide. Aang stood up. He was tired, but he saw the threat. If the scarabs reached them, they would be eaten alive. He used airbending. He created a wind tunnel. He blew the scarabs back over the rim of the crater, into the lava. "We need a pickup," Karis roared. "Inquisitor, call the fleet." "We have no ship," Vane yelled back. "The fleet is weeks away." "There is a ship," Aang said. He pointed to the valley. In the middle of the chaos, a word-bearer's Thunderhawk gunship had landed to evacuate their VIPs. It was surrounded by Necrons, but its engines were running. "You are insane," Kara said. "It is the only way," Aang said. "We steal their ship." It was a suicide mission. They had to go down the mountain. They had to cross the battlefield. They had to fight through Chaos Marines and Necron warriors. And they had to hijack a vehicle that belonged to traitors. "Do it," Vane ordered. "Advance." They ran down the slope. It was a controlled slide. They used the cooling lava rock as a path. Aang surfed on a slab of stone. He moved faster than the Marines. He used air blast to deflect incoming fire. They reached the valley floor. It was hell. The air was filled with green lightning and red bolter fire. A Necron destroyer, a floating platform with a heavy cannon, saw them. It turned its gun toward Vane. Aang saw it. He did not have time to warn Vane. He jumped. He landed on the destroyer. The machine was cold metal. Aang placed his hand on the chassis. He used metal bending. He sensed the internal gyroscope. He crushed it. The machine spun out of control and crashed into the ground. Aang rolled off. He was muddy and bruised. A word-bearer charged him with a combat knife. Aang ducked. He swept the Marine's legs with a gust of wind. The Marine fell. Karis finished him with a stomp to the head. They were 50 meters from the Thunderhawk. The ramp was up. The engines were spooling. It was about to take off. "Tas, I will open it," Aang yelled. He ran forward. He was a blur of motion. He dodged a Gauss beam, that took off part of his ear. He felt the burn. He did not stop. He reached the ship. He jumped and grabbed the landing strut. He climbed up to the door. He hammered on the hull. He felt the mechanism. He bent the locks. He ripped the door open. Inside, 3 word bearers were strapped in. They looked surprised. Aang blew them out of their seats with a pulse of air. They flew out the open door and fell to the ground. "Get in," Aang shouted. The red scorpions and Vane scrambled on board. Karis ran to the cockpit. He was a space marine. He could fly anything. He grabbed the controls. He smashed the corrupted pilot's head against the console and threw the body out. "Hang on," Karis yelled. The Thunderhawk lurched into the air. Green beams sizzled past the hull. One hit the left wing. Armor plating vanished, but the ship held together. Karis punched the thrusters. They shot up into the sky. They left the burning valley and the waking tomb behind. They broke the atmosphere. They were in space. The stars were quiet. Aang sat on the floor of the cargo bay. He was shaking. He touched his ear. It was bleeding. He looked at Vane. The Inquisitor was slumped against the wall. He looked grey. "We made it," Vane whispered. "We left the armsmen," Aang said. Vane nodded. "Yes, we did." Aang looked at his hands. They were covered in soot and blood. He had started a war. He had killed men. He had left good people to die. He felt the Avatar spirit inside him. It was not peaceful anymore. It was hard. It was a warrior spirit. "What now?" Aang asked. "Now we have a ship," Vane said. "We have a transponder. We signal the Imperium. And we wait." But the chain reaction was not over. On the planet below, the Necron Overlord stood amidst the ruins of the Word-Bearer's ritual. He looked up at the fleeing ship. He analyzed the energy signature of the boy who had cracked his tomb. It was a biological anomaly, a being that manipulated matter without technology, a threat to the Silent King's plans. The Overlord sent a signal. It was a tachyon pulse. It traveled faster than light. It went to the edge of the galaxy. It went to a dynasty flagship. The message was simple: harvest the anomaly. Aang did not know this. He only knew that he was tired. He closed his eyes. He tried to meditate, but all he saw was fire. In the cockpit, Karis checked the fuel. They had enough to reach the edge of the system, but the ship's machine spirit was angry. It was a chaos ship. The walls whispered. The controls tried to bite Karis's hands. "Inquisitor," Karis called out. "The ship is fighting me. The corruption is deep." Aang stood up. He walked to the cockpit. He placed his hand on the dashboard. He felt the dark spirit in the machine. It was hungry. It was hate. Aang did not try to cleanse it with light. He did not try to heal it. He used his new understanding. He used authority. "Obey," Aang said. He pushed his will into the machine. He used the force of his spirit to crush the demon in the circuitry. It was spirit bending, but aggressive. It was domination. The whispering stopped. The lights stopped flickering. The ship submitted. It recognized a stronger predator. Karis looked at Aang. The Space Marine's eyes were wide. He had never seen a Psyker dominate a machine spirit like that. It was not holy. It was terrifying. "Set course for the Mandeville Point," Aang said. His voice sounded older. "We need to jump." "We don't have a navigator," Karis said. "I will guide us," Aang said. "That is suicide," Vane said from the back. "You will be lost in the warp." "I am the bridge," Aang said. "I can see the path." He sat in the co-pilot's chair. He closed his eyes. He reached out with his senses. He did not look for the light of the Astronomicon. He looked for the currents of the spirit world. He saw the warp outside. It was a storm. But he was an airbender. He knew how to fly in a storm. You don't fight the wind. You become the wind. Engage the warp drive, Aang ordered. Karas hesitated. Then he pushed the lever. The stars stretched into lines. The Thunderhawk tore a hole in reality. They entered hell. This ended in the belly of the beast. Aang was no longer a passenger. He was the pilot, and he was steering them into the unknown. The strategic situation had changed. They were no longer prey on a planet. They were a rogue element in the great ocean. And Aang was changing into something the galaxy had never seen before. A Psyker who did not borrow power from the warp, but imposed order upon it. The cost was his innocence. He had sacrificed a planet to save a squad. He had killed to survive. The monk from the Southern Air Temple was dead. The avatar of the Imperium was born. The transition from the warp back to real space felt like falling off a cliff. The Thunderhawk shook violently. The metal groaned. Inside the cockpit, Aang gasped. He let go of the controls. He slumped forward. His nose was bleeding. His tattoos were dull and grey. He had held the ship together for 3 weeks of hell. He had steered them through storms of madness. He had fought off whispers that tried to eat his mind. Now they were out. The stars were steady again. But the ship was dying. The fuel gauge was on 0. The life support systems were failing. The air was cold and stale. Sergeant Karas grabbed the yoke. He checked the sensors. They had emerged in the segmentum tempestus. They were far from where they started, but they were alive. Karas looked at the navigation map. There was a system nearby. It was called Orestes. It was a forge world, a planet dedicated to the machine god. It was a place of industry and smoke. It was a fortress. "We have no fuel to reach the main hive," Karas said. His voice was dry. He had not drunk water in 2 days. "We must land in the outer wastelands, the ash dunes." "Do it," Aang whispered. He was too weak to argue. In the back of the ship, Inquisitor Vane was unconscious. The wound on his shoulder had turned black. The infection from the jungle planet had spread. He was burning with fever. He needed medicine. He needed surgery. If he did not get help in 12 hours, he would die. Karas guided the ship down. They hit the atmosphere of Orestes. It was a thick soup of brown smog. The clouds were made of chemical waste. Acid rain lashed the hull. Below them, the surface was a grey desert of industrial ash. Mountains of scrap metal rose like jagged teeth. There were no trees. There were no animals. There were only scavengers and dust. The Thunderhawk crash-landed in a valley of rusted pipes. The landing gear collapsed. The ship skidded for a mile. It slammed into a pile of old tank treads. Silence followed. The engines died. The power went out. Aang unbuckled his seatbelt. He fell to the floor. He crawled to the back. He checked Vane. The Inquisitor was breathing in shallow gasps. His skin was grey. Aang tried to waterbend. He wanted to heal the wound, but there was no water in the air. The air was dry and toxic. Aang poured the last drops from his canteen onto his hands. He tried to pull the poison out. The black veins on Vane's shoulder receded slightly, but it was not enough. The infection was deep. "He needs a medikey," Karas said. The Space Marine stood in the doorway. He had his helmet off. His face was scarred and gaunt. "We need to find a settlement." "I will go," Aang said. He stood up. He used his staff to steady himself. "You are a target," Karas said. "If the Mechanicus sees you, they will dissect you. If the locals see you, they might kill you for your clothes. Vane will die if I stay," Aang said. "We have no choice." This was the small choice. Aang chose to prioritize one life. He chose to save his captor. He chose loyalty over secrecy. In the 41st millennium, secrecy is survival. Kindness is a risk. Aang did not know that this choice would set the sector on fire. They built a stretcher from scrap metal. Karis pulled it. Aang walked beside him. They left the ship. They walked into the ash storm. The wind howled. It carried flecks of metal that cut the skin. Aang pulled his collar up. He used airbending to create a small bubble around Vayne to keep the dust out of his lungs. They walked for hours. They saw lights in the distance. It was a shanty town built into the side of a massive drainage pipe. The people there were dregs. They were the unwanted. They scavenged the waste of the Forge world. They wore rags and gas masks. They looked at the giant space marine with fear. They looked at the boy with curiosity. Karis marched into the town square. He held his bolter. "I need a chirurgeon," he boomed. "By order of the Inquisition." The people scattered. They were terrified. The Inquisition usually meant death. A local elder stepped forward. He was a hunchback with a robotic eye. He pointed to a tent made of plastic sheets. "We have a sore bones," the elder rasped. "But we have no drugs. The Mechanicus keeps the drugs in the hive." They brought Vayne into the tent. The Sawbones was a dirty man with shaking hands. He looked at the wound. He shook his head. "Gangrene, sepsis. I have to cut the arm off, and without antibiotics the shock will kill him." "No," Aang said. "Do not cut. He is dead already, boy," the Sawbone said. "The poison is in his heart." Aang looked at Vayne. He looked at the suffering in the tent. There were other patients. A child with a hacking cough. A woman with radiation burns. They were all dying slowly. Aang felt a surge of emotion. It was anger. It was pity. It was the Avatar's duty. "I can save him," Aang said. "Don't," Karis warned. "Keep your power hidden." "People are watching," Aang said. He pointed to the open flap of the tent. A crowd had gathered. "If I save him, they will help us. If I let him die, we are just stragglers in the desert." Aang made his decision. He stepped forward. He placed his hands on Vayne's chest. He closed his eyes. He did not use the water from a canteen. He used the water in the air. He used the water in the blood. He focused on the energy flow within the body. In the Avatar world, healing is moving water. In this world, healing is fighting entropy. Aang's tattoos began to glow. A soft white light filled the dirty tent. The scavengers gasped. They fell to their knees. They had never seen light like that. They had only seen the red glow of furnaces and the green glow of radiation. This light was pure. Aang pulled the water through Vayne's system. He filtered the toxins. He pushed the infection out through the pores. Black sludge oozed out of Vayne's skin. Aang washed it away with a sphere of clean water he condensed from the humidity. The wound on the shoulder knitted together. The skin turned pink. Vayne took a deep breath. His eyes snapped open. The tent was silent. The Sawbones dropped his knife. The elder was weeping. "A miracle," a woman whispered. "The Emperor has sent a saint." Karis cursed under his breath. "We need to move. Now." But it was too late. The crowd surged forward. They did not attack. They begged. They held up their sick children. They grabbed the hem of Aang's robe. "Heal us," they cried. "Touch us, saint." Aang looked at them. He could not say no. He was Aang. He spent the next hour healing. He fixed the child's lungs. He soothed the radiation burns. He drained the abscesses. With every healing, the crowd grew larger. Word spread to the neighboring settlements. The Saint of the Ash was here. High above, in the orbital station of Orestes, a monitoring servitor flagged an energy spike. It was not a weapon. It was a psychic resonance. It matched the profile of a sanctioned miracle. The data was sent to the Ecclesiarchy Cardinal stationed in the main hive city. Cardinal Ignato was a man of ambition. He was losing control of the worker population. Productivity was down. Unrest was up. He needed a symbol. He saw the report. A boy in the wastelands performing miracles. A space marine of the Red Scorpions guarding him. An Inquisitor in his company. Ignato saw an opportunity. He did not see a threat. He saw a tool to unite the planet. Ignato ordered his personal shuttle. He ordered a squad of battle sisters, the Order of the Valorous Heart, to escort him. He flew to the ash wastes. Back in the shantytown, the situation was getting out of control. Thousands of people surrounded the tent. They were crushing each other to get close. Karis had to fire warning shots into the air to keep them back. Vayne was sitting up. He was weak, but his mind was sharp. He saw the crowd. He saw the adoration. He grabbed Aang's arm. "You fool," Vayne hissed. "You have started a cult." "I saved them," Aang said. "They were in pain." "Pain is the currency of the Imperium," Vayne shouted. "By taking it away, you have disrupted the order. Look at them. They are not working. They are not scavenging. They are worshipping you. The Mechanicus will view this as a revolt." As Vayne spoke, the sound of engines filled the sky. A golden shuttle descended. It was flanked by 2 gunships. The symbol of the ecclesiarchy was painted on the side. A skull inside a sunburst. The crowd parted. They cheered. They thought the church had come to welcome the saint. Cardinal Ignato stepped out. He wore heavy robes of red velvet. He carried a staff topped with a golden eagle. Behind him marched 10 Sisters of Battle. They wore power armor of black and white. They carried bolters and flamers. They looked like statues of death. Ignato walked up to the tent. He looked at Aang. He saw the tattoos. He saw the youth. He knelt. "Blessings, child," Ignato said. His voice was smooth like oil. "The Emperor has touched you." Aang was confused. "I am just Aang. He is humble," Ignato announced to the crowd. "A true sign of sanctity. The boy has healed the sick. He has purged the corruption. He is a living saint." The crowd roared. They chanted, "Saint Aang, Saint Aang." Karis stepped forward. He towered over the cardinal. "This is a state matter, Cardinal. The boy is under the jurisdiction of the Inquisition and the Adeptus Astartes. He is not a relic for your church." Ignato smiled. It was a dangerous smile. "The Inquisition investigates threats, Sergeant. The church celebrates miracles. Unless you are claiming this boy is a heretic." Karis hesitated. If he said Aang was a psyker, the Sisters of Battle would be duty-bound to burn him. If he agreed he was a saint, the church would take him. It was a political trap. "He is a sanctioned asset," Karis grunted. "Then he belongs to the people," Ignato said. "Come, Saint Aang. The Hive City awaits. We have a cathedral prepared for you. You will heal the nobility. You will bless the factories." Aang looked at Vayne. Vayne gave a subtle nod. They were trapped. They had to play along. If they refused, the sisters would open fire, and Aang would not fight the nuns. They boarded the shuttle. They were flown to the Hive City. It was a mountain of metal. Towers pierced the clouds. The air inside was recycled and smelled of incense. They were taken to the Grand Cathedral. It was a massive hall of stone and gold. Stained glass windows depicted wars and slaughter. Aang was placed on a throne. Ignato stood beside him. He broadcasted Aang's face to the entire planet. "Behold," Ignato preached. "The golden light has returned. Work harder, citizens, for the saint watches you." Aang hated it. He felt like a prisoner again. But this time, the cage was made of gold. He tried to tell Ignato that he wanted to leave. Ignato just smiled and gave him more grapes. "We need to leave," Aang told Karis that night. They were in a luxury chamber. This feels wrong. The spirit of this place is twisted. We are refueling, Karis said. Vane is negotiating for a ship. Give us 2 days. But the galaxy does not wait for negotiations. The strategic chain reaction began. The news of the Saint of Orestes left the system via astropathic message. It reached the ears of other factions. On the nearby moon, a cell of the Inquisition heard the news. But this cell was not like Vane. They were monodominants. They believed that all psykers were witches. They believed that any deviation from the norm was heresy. Inquisitor Grendel read the report. He saw a boy using unapproved magic. He saw a cardinal using the boy to gain power. Grendel declared it a false idol heresy. He mobilized his stormtroopers. He called for support from the Grey Knights. The Grey Knights are the demon hunters. They are the ultimate sanction against uncontrolled psykers. At the same time, the Genestealer cult hidden in the lower levels of the Hive City saw the broadcast. They were a secret army of alien hybrids waiting for the Tyranids to arrive. They saw Aang heal people. They realized that Aang's power could disrupt their psychic link to the Hive mind. Or worse, his order would expose their corruption. The makers of the cult ordered an assassination. The catastrophe hit on the second day. Aang was in the cathedral plaza. He was blessing a line of workers. Suddenly, the ground exploded. Cultists burst out of the sewers. They were bald, purple-skinned hybrids with 3 arms. They carried mining lasers and autoguns. They screamed alien screeches. "Kill the false prophet," the Makers shrieked. The Sisters of Battle formed a defensive line. "Purge the Xenos," the Canonists yelled. Flamers roared. Prometheum fire bathed the plaza. The cultists burned, but they kept coming. They were fearless. Aang stood in the center. He did not run. He saw the violence. He saw innocents dying in the crossfire. "Stop," Aang yelled. He slammed his staff into the ground. A shockwave of air knocked everyone down, cultists and sisters alike. Then the sky turned dark. A drop pod crashed through the ceiling of the plaza. It was silver. It was inscribed with holy wards. The door blasted open. 5 Terminators of the Grey Knight stepped out. They were giants in silver armor. They carried halberds that crackled with blue energy. They were the most elite warriors of humanity, and they were here to kill Aang. "Target identified," the Justicar said. His voice was like a tomb door closing. "Omega-level Psyker. Unsanctioned. Execute." "No," Karis shouted. He jumped in front of Aang. "He is under my protection." "Stand aside, Red Scorpion," the Grey Knight said. "Or share his fate. He is a witch. He has bewitched the population." "He saved them," Karis argued. The Genestealer cultists took advantage of the confusion. They charged the Grey Knights. The Grey Knights moved with blurring speed. They cut the cultists in half with their halberds. They fired storm bolters that blew bodies apart. It was a 3-way war. The cult versus the Sisters versus the Grey Knights, and Aang was the prize. Vane ran up to Aang. He had a laser gun in his good hand. "We have to go. The Grey Knights will not stop. They cannot be reasoned with." "Why are they fighting?" Aang cried. "We are all humans." "There is no human," Vane yelled. "There are factions, and you just united them in war. Move." Aang looked at the destruction. The cathedral was burning. The people he had healed were being trampled. He realized the lesson Vane had tried to teach him. In this universe, hope is a provocation. A light in the dark attracts monsters. Aang felt a cold resolve settle in his chest. He could not talk his way out of this. He could not heal his way out. He had to fight. He looked at the Grey Knights. They were marching toward him, ignoring the cultists. The Justicar raised his stormbolter. Aang entered the Avatar state. But this time it was different. He did not just glow white. He pulled the smog from the air. He pulled the smoke from the fires. He pulled the metal from the destroyed tanks. He formed a suit of elemental armor around himself. He looked like a giant made of debris and wind. The Justicar fired. The explosive shells hit Aang's armor. They detonated. The debris absorbed the blast. Aang raised a hand. He did not attack the knights directly. He attacked the ground. He earthbended the plaza. He created a massive fissure between him and the knights. The ground split open. The knights stopped. They activated their teleporters to jump across. Aang predicted the teleport. He sensed the warp distortion. As soon as the knights materialized, Aang hit them with a compressed blast of air. It was a cannonball of wind. It hit the Terminators with enough force to knock them off their feet. They slid backward, their armor sparking against the stone. "Run," Aang told Karis and Vayne. They ran to the landing pad. Cardinal Ignato's shuttle was there. The pilot was dead. Karis jumped in. He started the engines. Aang dropped his elemental armor. He jumped onto the ramp. The shuttle took off. The Grey Knights fired at the shuttle. Bolts tore through the wing. Smoke poured out. But Karis kept it flying. They shot up into the smog. They broke the cloud layer. They reached the upper atmosphere. The Thunderhawk was gone, but there were other ships. A freighter was leaving orbit. It was a bulk hauler carrying ore. "Dock with that freighter," Vayne ordered. "We hijack it." "That is piracy," Karis said. "It is survival," Vayne shouted. They docked. They boarded the freighter. They took control of the bridge. The crew surrendered when they saw a space marine. They jumped to warp. As they entered the Empyrean, Aang sat in the captain's chair. He watched Orestes disappear. He saw the fires burning in the Hive City. Vayne stood next to him. "You see now?" Vayne asked softly. "I see," Aang said. "You tried to do a good thing," Vayne said. "And because of that, a cardinal is dead. A Genestealer cult has risen. The Grey Knights have declared exterminatus on the planet to contain the taint. Orestes will burn. All those people you healed, they will die in nuclear fire." Aang closed his eyes. Tears leaked out. "I just wanted to help." "Your help is a weapon," Vayne said. "You are not a boy. You are a strategic asset. You are a nuclear bomb that breathes. Until you accept that, people will die around you." Aang wiped his face. He opened his eyes. The grey was darker now. "I understand." "What do we do now?" Karis asked. He was checking the star map. "The entire sector is looking for us. The Grey Knights will track this ship." Aang looked at the map. He pointed to a region of space that was blank, a region surrounded by warp storms, a place where no Imperial ships went. "We go there," Aang said. "That is the Maelstrom," Karis said. "That is the Hurons' territory, the Red Corsairs. Pirates, traitors. They won't look for a saint among pirates," Aang said. "And I need to learn." "Learn what?" Vayne asked. "How to fight," Aang said. "Not just bending. I need to learn war. If I am a weapon, I will be a sharp one." The small choice to heal a dying man had led to the destruction of a city. It had stripped Aang of his illusion of being a peacemaker. He was now a fugitive, hunted by the heroes of the Imperium. The outcome was massive. The sector defenses were shattered by the civil war on Orestes. The Orc war that was approaching the sector found the defenses weakened. The Orcs smashed through the lines. The strategic map turned red. Billions would die because Aang stopped to save one. This was the way to the 41st millennium. Aang sat in the dark, and for the first time, he did not meditate on peace. He meditated on the tactical application of fire. The Avatar was gone. The Warlord was beginning to form. The freighter drifted deeper into the storm. It ended with the galaxy burning behind them, and the abyss waiting ahead. 3 years passed in the silence of the Maelstrom. The Maelstrom is a giant storm in space. It is like the Eye of Terror, but smaller. It is a place where the laws of physics do not work. Time moves backward. Gravity goes sideways. It is the home of pirates, renegades, and monsters. It was the perfect hiding place for the most wanted boy in the galaxy. The freighter was now called the Broken Arrow. It was hidden deep inside a hollow asteroid. The crew had changed. The original crew was gone. They had been replaced by servitors and automated systems. Only 3 people remained: Inquisitor Vane, Sergeant Karas, and Subject 808, Aang. Aang was not a child anymore. He was 16. He was taller. His muscles were hard like wire. He did not wear the orange robes of the air nomads. He wore a bodysuit made of flak armor. Over it, he wore a cloak made from the hide of a warp beast. His staff was gone. He carried a sword. It was a Force sword taken from a dead elder pirate. Aang had learned that sometimes air is not enough. Sometimes you need steel. Inquisitor Vane sat in the command center of the asteroid base. He was old now. The corruption from Orestes had taken a toll. He needed a cane to walk, but his mind was sharp. He watched Aang training in the cargo bay. Aang was fighting Karas. Karas was using live ammunition. The Space Marine fired his bolter. The rounds flew at supersonic speeds. Aang did not dodge. He stopped them. He did not use air. He used gravity. He created a point of high density in front of his chest. The bullets hit the gravity well and flattened. They fell to the floor as useless metal pancakes. Again, Aang said. His voice was deep. It did not sound like a monk. It sounded like a soldier. Karas reloaded. "You are relying on the shield too much," the Space Marine grunted. "If your concentration breaks, you die." "My concentration does not break," Aang said. "Arrogance," Karas said. He charged. He swung a combat knife the size of a forearm. Aang did not move his feet. He moved the floor. He bent the metal deck plates. A steel wall shot up. Karas smashed into it. Before the Marine could recover, Aang twisted his hand. The metal wall wrapped around Karas. It pinned his arms to his sides. It lifted him off the ground. "Yield," Aang said. Karas struggled. His power armor whirred, but the metal held. "I yield," Karas growled. Aang released him. The metal smoothed back into the floor. Aang did not smile. He did not bow. He walked to the water tank and took a drink. Vane turned off the monitor. He was worried. Aang was strong. He was an Alpha-Level Psyker now. He could crush a tank with his mind, but his spirit was cold. The joy was gone. The Avatar was supposed to be a bridge between worlds. Aang had become a wall. He blocked out the emotions. He blocked out the pain. He was becoming exactly what Vane had asked for, a weapon. And Vane was starting to realize that weapons do not have a conscience. The strategic silence ended on a Tuesday. The sensors in the asteroid field screamed. A fleet had dropped out of the warp. It was not a patrol. It was an invasion force. The ships were painted red and black. They were covered in spikes and brass skulls. They belonged to the Red Corsairs. This was the warband of Huron Blackheart, the tyrant of Badab. He was the pirate king of the Maelstrom. He had found them. "How did they find us?" Karas asked. He was putting on his helmet. "We have been here too long," Vane said. "And in the Maelstrom, secrets leak. Someone sold us out. Probably a supply runner." Aang looked at the screen. He saw the flagship. It was a battle barge called the Wolf of Fenris. It was a captured loyalist ship, twisted by chaos. It was huge. It could destroy a continent. "They want me," Aang said. "They want your power," Vane corrected. "Huron collects monsters. He wants to chain you to his throne and use you as a battery. We cannot fight a fleet, Karis said. We need to run. The asteroid is surrounded, Aang said. He pointed to the tactical map. Smaller raider ships were circling the rock. Boarding torpedoes were already in the air. We fight. The first boarding torpedo smashed into the cargo bay. The hull breached. Air rushed out. Aang did not panic. He created an air bubble around himself, Vayne, and Karis. The doors of the torpedo blasted open. Chaos Space Marines charged out. They were red corsairs. They were savage. They used chain axes and jagged swords. They roared praises to the dark gods. Aang stepped forward. He did not take a stance. He just looked at them. He felt the water in their bodies. He felt the blood. He felt the sweat. He clenched his fist. The lead Marine stopped. He grabbed his throat. The water in his cells turned to ice. He froze from the inside out. He fell over, a solid statue of dead meat. The other Marines hesitated. They had never seen sorcery like this. Chaos sorcerers throw lightning or fire. This was quiet. This was absolute. Aang moved his hand in a sweeping motion. The air in the room became a blade. It cut through the ceramite armor of the second Marine. It cut through the bone. The Marine fell in 2 pieces. Push them back, Karis yelled. He opened fire with his bolter. They fought their way to the hangar. They needed to get to the broken arrow. The asteroid base was overrun. Hundreds of pirates were pouring in. They reached the ship. Karis started the engines. Vayne climbed the ramp. Aang stood at the bottom. He was covering their retreat. A massive figure stepped into the hangar. It was not a normal Marine. It was a Terminator. He carried a heavy flamer. He laughed, a deep, wet sound. "The tyrant sends his regards, little god," the Terminator said. He pulled the trigger. A stream of liquid fire shot at Aang. Promethium burns underwater. It burns in a vacuum. It is a hateful fire. Aang did not block it. He seized it. He bent the fire. He took control of the heat. He turned the stream back on the Terminator. The fire engulfed the pirate. The Terminator screamed as his own weapon cooked him. Aang walked up the ramp. The broken arrow blasted out of the hangar. It flew into the void. But the trap was not just on the asteroid. The Red Corsair fleet was waiting. A dozen cruisers surrounded them. Tractor beams locked onto the broken arrow. Invisible hands grabbed the ship and pulled it toward the Wolf of Fenris. "We are caught," Karis said. He fought the controls. "The beams are too strong." Vayne looked at Aang. "This is the convergence. We have nowhere to go." "I can break the beams," Aang said. "But I need to go outside." "In the void?" Karis asked. "You will freeze." "I am the Avatar," Aang said. "I control the energy." Aang went to the airlock. He cycled the door. He stepped out into space. There was no air. It was absolute zero. But Aang did not freeze. He entered the Avatar state. His eyes glowed. His tattoos glowed. He generated a field of heat around his body. He was a small sun in the darkness. He looked at the massive battle barge. He saw the tractor beam emitters. There were glowing green towers on the hull. Aang reached out. He grabbed a nearby asteroid. It was the size of a house. He threw it. He did not touch it. He used earthbending. He threw the rock across 5 miles of space. It smashed into the tractor beam emitter. The tower exploded. The beam failed. The broken arrow lurched free. "Go," Aang spoke into his vox speed. "Jump to warp." "We cannot leave you," Karis shouted. "I will follow," Aang said. "Go." But before Karis could engage the drive, a new alarm screamed. Reality tore open. A second fleet arrived. Silver ships. Sleek, fast, and deadly. The Grey Knights. The Inquisition had not stopped looking. They had tracked the psychic footprint of the boy who threw lava and healed cities. They had found him. The Grey Knight strike cruiser, the Sword of Titan, opened fire immediately, but not at Aang. They fired at the Red Corsairs. The Imperium hates chaos more than anything. The space battle became a three-way slaughter. The Red Corsairs turned their guns on the Grey Knights. Lance beams crossed the darkness. Torpedoes exploded silently in the vacuum. Aang floated in the middle of the war. He was a tiny speck between giants. He saw the Red Corsairs. He saw the Grey Knights. Both of them wanted to kill him or enslave him. A communication signal overrode his vox bead. It was a telepathic message. It came from the Grey Knight ship. Subject 808, the voice said. It was cold and hard like iron. This is Grandmaster Mordrak. Surrender and your death will be swift. Resist and your soul will be obliterated. Aang looked at the silver ship. Then he heard a second voice, a raspy, laughing voice. It came from the Red Corsair ship. Boy, the voice of Huron Blackheart whispered, the Imperium wants to kill you. I offer you a kingdom. Join me. We will burn the galaxy together. You will be free. Aang closed his eyes. The offer was unavoidable. Death or slavery, order or chaos. He remembered the monks. They taught him that life is sacred, but the monks were dead. He remembered Katara. She taught him hope, but Katara was in another universe. He remembered Vayne. Vayne taught him that survival is the only truth. Aang opened his eyes. They were not white. They were not grey. They were gold. A terrible, burning gold. No, Aang said. His voice was projected psychically. It was heard by every soul in both fleets. I do not choose you. Aang raised his arms. He reached out to the maelstrom itself. He felt the warp storm swirling around the system. He felt the raw, chaotic energy. Usually, the avatar brings balance, but in 40K, balance is impossible. You must impose your will. Aang grabbed the storm. He pulled the warp energy. He did not let it corrupt him. He filtered it through his own spirit. He bent the energy itself. Energy bending, Aang whispered. He created a shockwave. It was a ring of pure force. It expanded from his body. It hit the Red Corsair ships. The ships did not explode. They stopped. Their engines died. Their power cores shut down. The daemons inside the ship screamed and vanished. Aang had imposed a moment of absolute stillness on them. He had stolen their energy. The wave hit the Grey Knight ship. The psychic wards on the ship flared and shattered. The Grey Knights, powerful psykers themselves, fell to their knees, clutching their heads. Aang had silenced the warp around them. He had cut them off from their source of power. The battle stopped. The silence was absolute. Aang flew back to the broken arrow. He entered the airlock. He walked onto the bridge. Karis and Vayne were staring at him. They were terrified. They had seen what he did. He had turned off a fleet. What are you? Vayne whispered. I am the answer, Aang said. He walked to the comm station. He opened a channel to the Grey Knight ship. Grandmaster, Aang said. You have a choice. You can try to kill me, and I will strip the souls from your bodies, or you can leave. There was a long pause. The Grey Knights are fearless, but they are also logical. They saw a power that could nullify the warp. They saw a weapon that could end the long war. We will not leave, Mordrak said, but we will cease fire. We wish to negotiate. No negotiations, Aang said. I am leaving. If you follow, you die. Aang cut the link. He turned to Karis. Take us to the Red Corsair flagship. The Wolf of Fenris, Karis asked. Why? It is full of traitors. It is my ship now, Aang said. I turned off their power. They are drifting. We will board it. We will kill the leaders, and we will take the rest. You want to become a pirate? Vayne asked. No, Aang said. I am going to build an army. A real army. One that does not serve the Emperor and does not serve chaos. That is heresy, Kara said. That is the path of the traitor. Aang looked at the Space Marine. The Emperor is a corpse on a chair. The Chaos Gods are monsters in the dark. Humanity needs something else. It needs balance. I will bring balance, even if I have to kill everyone to do it. Karis looked at his bolt pistol. He had a clear shot. Aang's back was turned. This was the moment. The Codex Astartes said, "Kill the witch." The duty of the Red Scorpions was clear. Karis raised the gun. His hand shook. He thought of the ravine. He thought of the healing in the tent. He thought of the boy who saved him from the vacuum. Karis lowered the gun. He betrayed his chapter. He betrayed his god. He chose his friend. Course set for the Wolf of Fenris, Karis said. They docked with the massive battleship. Aang walked through the airlock. The red corsairs inside were confused. Their systems were down. Their lights were out. They saw the boy walking toward them. Aang did not fight. He used the blood-bending technique he had sworn never to use. He controlled their bodies. He forced them to kneel. Hundreds of hardened killers dropped to their knees against their will. He walked to the bridge. Huron Blackheart was not there. The tyrant had fled in an escape pod when the power died. He was a survivor. He knew when he was beaten. Aang sat on the command throne of the battle barge. It was a chair made of black iron and bone. It was uncomfortable. It smelled of blood. Vayne stood at his right hand. Kara stood at his left. We have a ship, Vayne said. We have a crew of slaves. We have the firepower to level a sector. What is the order, Lord Aang? Aang looked out the viewing port. He saw the maelstrom swirling. He saw the grey night ship turning away, retreating to report this new threat to Terra. We go to the Exodite worlds, Aang said. We find the Eldar. We find the Tau. We find anyone who wants to live. You want to build an alliance? Vayne asked. I want to build a safe zone, Aang said. A place where the Inquisition cannot go. A place where chaos cannot enter. The Imperium will send a crusade to destroy us, Karis warned. They will send millions of men. Let them come, Aang said. His eyes glowed gold again. I will bend the galaxy until it fits. This was the final convergence. The boy was dead. The Avatar was dead. What remained was a warlord of order. He had rejected the binary choice of the 41st millennium. He had chosen a third path. But the third path was the hardest. To create peace in the Warhammer universe, you must possess superior firepower. Aang had the firepower. He had the will. He tapped the arm of the throne. The ship systems flickered back to life, but the lights did not come on red. They came on blue, a cold, calm blue. Aang looked at the tactical display. The sector map was full of red icons, enemies everywhere. Begin the liberation, Aang ordered. The Wolf of Fenris turned its massive prow toward the edge of the maelstrom. The engines roared, not with the scream of demons, but with the hum of elemental power. The strategic consequences were immediate. The balance of power in the segmentum tempestus shifted. A new faction had appeared. It was not Imperium. It was not Chaos. It was not Xenos. It was the Avatar. And for the first time in 10,000 years, the Chaos Gods stopped laughing. They looked at the boy on the throne, and they felt something they had not felt since the Emperor walked among the stars. They felt fear. This ended not with a bang, but with a new course heading. The story of the lost monk was over. The history of the Phoenix King of the Stars had begun. The chronicle would continue, written in blood and starlight. But for now, the record was sealed. The convergence was complete. Aang had chosen his destiny, and the galaxy held its breath. The file concerning Subject 808 is now sealed. It is kept in the deepest vault of the Inquisition on Terra. It is marked with the triple rune of absolute redaction. To read this file without permission is a crime punishable by death. The official history says that the black ship Silent Judgment was lost with all hands due to a warped storm. It says that Inquisitor Silas Vane died a hero fighting traitors. It says that the planet Orestes was destroyed by a Necron awakening. These are lies. The High Lords of Terra tell these lies because the truth is too dangerous. The truth is that the Imperium has lost control of the Maelstrom sector. 50 years have passed since the events recorded in this chronicle. The galaxy is darker than ever. The Great Rift has torn the sky in half. The Tyranids are eating systems whole. The Necrons are waking up in their billions. But there is one anomaly that defies all logic. In the heart of the Maelstrom, where the warp storm should be strongest, there is a circle of perfect calm. It is called the Eye of the Storm. It spans 3 star systems. Inside this circle, the warp is silent. Demons cannot manifest there. Navigators report that the Sea of Souls becomes as flat as a mirror. Imperial ships that enter this zone do not report back, but they are not destroyed. Long-range scans show that the planets inside the zone are green. They are growing. The atmosphere of dead worlds has been restored. The factories of the Forge worlds have stopped making weapons and started making farming equipment. This is the domain of the Avatar. Reports from spies are rare, but they paint a picture that terrifyingly contradicts the Imperial Creed. They say that a fleet guards this space. It is a fleet of mismatched ships. Imperial cruisers fly next to Eldar corsairs. Tau battleships drift alongside captured Chaos barges. They are painted in blue and white. They do not fight for a god. They fight for the balance. At the center of this fleet sits the Wolf of Fenris. It is no longer a ship of spikes and blood. It has been reshaped. The metal is smooth. The hull glows with a soft light. The Inquisition has sent 3 crusades to destroy this anomaly. None have returned. The first crusade was stopped when their engines simply turned off. The second crusade defected. The entire fleet lowered their shields and joined the enemy. The third crusade was led by the Minotaur's chapter of Space Marines. They are brutal killers. They reported engaging the enemy. Then, their transmission ended with a sound that haunted the Vox officers for years. It was the sound of 1,000 Space Marines feeling fear for the first time. They were not killed. They were dismantled. Their weapons were turned into dust. They were sent back to Imperial space in escape pods, unharmed but stripped of their armor, with a simple message carved into the metal of their pods. The message said, "Leave us alone." The ecclesiarchy calls Subject 808 the false saint. They preach that he is a trick of the dark gods. They burn anyone who owns a small statue of a bald monk. But in the underhives of 1,000 worlds, the legend grows. The workers whisper about the boy of the elements. They whisper that there is a place where there is no war. They whisper that the Emperor sits on a throne of gold, but the Avatar sits on a throne of wind. This hope is dangerous. It causes rebellions. It causes riots. The mere idea of Aang threatens the control of the Imperium more than any Au revoir ever could. Even the enemies of man are wary. The Tyranid hive fleets have diverted their path around the Maelstrom. The Great Devourer senses a biomass that fights back with the fury of a planet. The Chaos Gods are angry. The Blood God Khorne roars because there is a place where blood does not flow. The Changer of Ways. Tzeentch plots, but his threads of fate snap when they touch the boy's domain. The Plague God, Nurgle, cannot spread his rot there, because the water heals. The chronicle ends here, but the history is still being written. Somewhere in the deep dark, Aang is still there. He is older now. He is likely not the boy who woke up in the ice. He is a king who has seen too much death. He watches the galaxy burn. He waits. The strategic scholars believe he is building his strength. They believe he is waiting for the moment when the Imperium finally collapses, when the throne fails, when the light of the Astronomicon goes out. He will not be a savior. He will be the new order. The recording ends with a final audio fragment recovered from a probe sent into the quiet zone. It is just the sound of wind. But in the 41st millennium, the sound of wind without the scream of war is the most terrifying sound of all.